It's a great pleasure, and thank you for the invitation. I was given 30 minutes to present you my views on how we should proceed towards a global circular economy. And let me start with a question which I always first like to ask. Where are we actually heading? There is one thing with which I always start my presentations, that is the fact that for the first time in human history we face the emergence of a single, tightly coupled human socio-ecological system of planetary scope. So we are the first generation which is actually facing that kind of reality. So we are more interconnected and interdependent than ever, and our individual and collective responsibility has thus enormously increased. It was very nicely explained by the Club of Rome. They claim that we have moved from an empty world, which was dominated by nature, to the full world, which is dominated by us, by humans. In the empty world, it was the labor and infrastructure which were the limiting factors of human well-being, while in the full world, it is natural resources and environmental things. What does that mean? That means that any economic decision for the future has to consider the question how we actually treat natural resources and environmental things. Maybe the best way, what is going right and what is going wrong, could be explained on this slide, which it's presenting an inclusive wealth index. Inclusive wealth index, it's a kind of a GDP plus. So it has three components: production capital, human capital, and natural capital. If we look to the slide, then we can see that production capital, which is a kind of a synonym for the GDP, because the gray dotted line is actually the growth per capita of GDP, but the non-dotted line. But the dotted line is the production capital per capita, and we can see that in the last 20 years, it has increased, it has almost doubled. While the human capital per capita, the blue dotted line, has practically been standstill, while the natural capital per capita, the green dotted line, has decreased in the last 20 years for almost 40%, which means that the growth of GDP in the past decades has been to a large extent achieved at the cost of depleting natural capital. If we are translating that to our market economies, which are decisive for our behavior, where producers and consumers meet, and of course the most important signal which we are getting are actually the price signals, then we can conclude that production capital is overvalued. We have seen that from the previous slide, that the human capital is undervalued, and that natural capital, unfortunately, it's in many cases not valued at all. If we are sending that kind of the signals on our markets, then we can hardly expect that we will have economic, social, and environmental balance. Many times when we are addressing the questions which are bothering us nowadays, we are approaching through the state and impact. So when we talk about climate, when we talk about biodiversity loss, we are actually addressing the end effect. Immediately when we would start to talk about drivers and pressures, we would need to talk about humans and human activity. And this is one thing with which the International Resource Panel, which I'm co-chairing, is actually focusing. So we try to create a bridge between the human activity on one hand, and on the other hand, the consequences of that human activity, and we try to look at everything through the natural resource use. This is leading me to our Global Resource Outlook, the most comprehensive report which we have put together. The natural resources which are included in the Global Resource Outlook are biomass, metals, fossil fuels, and non-metallic materials. In the report, they are actually addressed via the name materials. Of course, natural resources are also including water and land, and they are also an important part of that story. When we look to the global material loss and material demand per capita and material productivity in the last 50 years, which we have had under our consideration, there we can conclude that global material use has more than tripled in the last 50 years. That half of that per capita growth has almost doubled, which means that a lot of that tripling was actually connected not only with the growth of population, but also with the economic growth. And finally, that material productivity, which is a kind of efficiency of the use of materials per unit of GDP, has been globally increasing till something like year 2000. That is the black non-dotted line in the slide. And after that, it started to decline. What is the reason? Because we see material productivity actually growing in all the countries. We have had a global structural shift where a lot of the things which were before produced by more material productive countries, which are more efficient, have been from, for example, Europe or Japan, have shifted from those countries to the production in Indonesia, India, China, those countries which are generally still less material, where material productivity is still on a lower level than in the high-income countries. This has caused that actually per unit of GDP from the year 2000, we have used more materials than actually before. We have also looked very carefully to environmental impacts in the value chain, in extraction and in the processing use. And we found out that 90% of global biodiversity related loss, land-related loss and water stress, 50% of global climate change impacts, and even 1/3 of air pollution health impacts can be attributed to the extraction and processing phase of those resources. So, to put it a bit more clearly, if you would buy a private car and if you would park it for the whole life, so not use it at all, you have already created 1/3 of air pollution health impacts, which is connected with that car, because the resources needs to be extracted and the car needs to be processed. If the current trends would continue, the global material consumption is predicted to double by 2060. That is leading us in the International Resource Panel to the very clear conclusion that if we want to continue with well-being and economic activity growth in the future, we need to decouple that from the growth of resource use and both from environmental impacts. This is simply essential. It has not been done a lot in practice, and it is clear that in the high developed countries, this is an urgent agenda, while it is also clear that for low income countries, they have still some needs which are connected with the development of infrastructure in the context of well-being, which will cause that probably they need to put themselves a kind of goal that they would relatively decouple. So very likely the consumption of natural resources in those countries will still grow, but hopefully less quickly than actually the growth of well-being and economic activity. Why is European Green Deal so important? European Green Deal is for the first time acknowledging that on such a clear level, and politically high level, that economic goals are not in contradiction with environmental. On the contrary, that it's setting a new growth strategy which is aiming to protect, conserve, enhance the European Union natural capital, and protect the health and well-being of citizens from environment-related risks and impacts. This transition must be, of course, just and inclusive, and it's also setting a kind of relation of European strategy via the United Nations 2030 Agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals. Circular economy is an essential part of European Green Deal. It should be seen as a kind of instrument for delivering decoupling I was talking about before, and also as a part of a bigger picture of economic, societal, and cultural transformation needed to deliver sustainable development goals. So let us go now to the circular economy. The first thing which I have to mention also, because I'm basically sharing this kind of presentation many times, is that the principles which are very much present in the circularity from reduce, repair, recycle, recover, dispose are pretty much also connected to how we talk and deal with the circular economy. So repetition, it's the most important ingredient for creating a real impact. Only 6 years ago, that was in December 2014, the European Commission has removed the circular economy package from its own agenda. Now, it is something which is gaining the track not only in European Union, but also globally. So we have to insist, we have to repeat, we have to explain, and that is very important. We need more circularity also in the global governance, if I put it like that. So sharing sovereignty instead of owing sovereignty is critical. And that's why I think that experiences which European Union gained also in other political space, related political questions and space would be very welcomed and needed when it comes to this global governance strengthening, which is terribly needed if we want to answer all of the questions which are basically nowadays very much of a global nature. It was nicely explained by a very good friend, Walter Stachel, saying that linear economy is like a river and circular economy is like a lake. And one of the things which it's fundamental to be understood is that the way how we are currently treating the climate challenges will simply not be sufficient if not circularity will also be included. Currently, the Paris Agreement looks pretty much addressing the questions from the carbon management and energy side, so from the supply side solutions. What would be necessary is to couple it also with the demand side solutions, everything which is linked to decoupling and to the circular economy. Of course, nature-based solutions, so ecosystem services and environmental things are also an important part of the story. So if you want to effectively deal with the climate change, you need to combine supply, demand, and nature-based solutions. We need to firmly move from product maximization, which is currently driving our economies, to actually providing human needs. We should never forget that we don't need cars, we actually need mobility, we don't need light bulbs, we need light, we don't need chairs, we need to sit, we don't need refrigerators, we need chilled and healthy food, we don't need CDs, we want to listen to the music, we don't need pesticides, we actually want healthy plants. So dematerialisation, rethinking ownership, from efficiency to sufficiency, these are the guiding lines which should guide us in future development of the circular economy prospects. One nice example is linked to the mobility system, where we can actually see that a typical French car is parked 92% of time, that 1.6% is looking for parking, 1% is sitting in congestion, and only 5% we are driving it. And if we take into account that the data are that typical European car, which is 5-seater, is actually normally packed with 1.5 people, then we can find out that the utilization of privately owned car, it's approximately 2%. So it's not only about shifting one by one from combustion to electric engine, which is of course an important part of the solution, but it's also other questions which are important. And this is in particular coming from one of the recent reports which were produced by the International Resource Panel, where we were trying to connect material management to the climate change. And we came to the conclusion that the most effective policies, as you can see from the slide, are actually related to car sharing and car riding. So more intensive use and making the vehicles lighter is actually the right way to go. And so in the first place, we are asking ourselves the question, how much of those cars which we are producing are actually really necessary to fulfill to human needs? And only in the second part, we are asking ourselves the question, how we can clean up the production of those cars and how we can make them more environmentally friendly. If we look at from the consumer perspective, then the major problem is of course linked to the preferences from consumers to own products like houses, cars, refrigerators, clothes, and so on. which is driving consumption in a massive lock-in and also underutilization of some of the resources which we are in building in those products. Solution in that respect is probably very much in the hands of the young generation, which is less ownership biased than we are, and also, of course, in providing alternative options. So, if we look to the same picture of this ownership from the producer side, then we would find out that the current situation is approximately like that. Producer is responsible for the product until it's produced. When it's selling it, it's the consumer which is responsible for the product. At the end of use, it's actually society. So producer has entirely lost the track about his own product, which of course, it's also problematic from the point of view how those products are actually dealt with. So if we would better connect producer with the product at the end of use, we can easily imagine that these products would be designed in totally different way, that the business models would be organized in totally different way. In essence, you don't need the eco design, which is from the regulation point of view, pressing producers to design the products in the environmentally friendly way, because they would be themselves interested to do it in that way. For that, you need few of the things. In particular, you need to retain the value in the product so that it would be economically attractive to do like something like that. You need to rethink the ownership and also align incentives with the regulation. An important part of that story, since the Portuguese presidency is putting that, and also European Commission very much in the center of attention, and also your conference, is that it's the digital connection and digital as an important circularity enabler. Lot of the things which are connected with circular economy have been known for decades, but unfortunately we were not able to implement them in practice. And digital is bringing exactly that, what was the missing element. So if we look to the Europe's Digital Future document, we can find very clear indications of the direction which we have to take. So reaching the ambitious of European Green Deal and the Sustainable Development Goal. Digital is an important part of that, and as mentioned, a powerful enabler for sustainability transition. It has to fully integrate the life cycle approach, and while it is playing that role as an important enabler, it has in the first place take care that for itself, so that the whole ICT sector, the data centers and telecommunications, the ICT equipment, everything would become fully circular. So this is pretty much an important part of the story of the transition. Now, let me make one step further, because we do believe recently we have in the Club of Rome and in Systemic prepared a report where we have critically looked to the European Green Deal. And we do believe that there are some essential ingredients which are missing to make it implementable. So ambition of the European Green Deal is absolutely high. It's setting zero net emissions of GHG by 2050, decoupling of growth and resource use. It's acknowledging the need for fair and just transition, and it's also aiming at strongly interlinked and mutually reinforcing policy recommendations. But implementation is uncertain. Why? Because it does not sufficiently address drivers and pressures that cause environmental damage, because it does not offer enough systemic perspective to guide decision making, and of course also due to implementation, which is put at extra risk because of the COVID-19 recovery. So we have created a kind of a proposal. We call it a system change compass, which was mapping and envisioning the system of which should be in service of people and planet, which derives system level orientations towards this desired state, and which is also creating a pathways within this prosperity and well-being within the planetary boundaries. So we have created a system with 10 directions of principles which would need to be fitted into that new reality. We have then applied it into the policy system, where we have connect each of those principles with 3 system change political orientations, so 30 in total. And then we have connected everything that with the real world, with the economic ecosystems, as we are calling them, and finally landed with 50 plus investment opportunities, which we are calling the champions for the future, which are entirely aligned, of course, with the circular economy philosophy and approach, and with the European Green Deal. So it is not actually any kind of criticism of European Green Deal. On the contrary, it's just trying to think in a bold way that how we can best implement that very brave policy which Commission has adopted, which was acknowledged, by the way, also by the forward which was provided by the President of the Commission, van der Leyen. There are 10 optics which we believe that needs a redefinition. Redefining prosperity, embracing social fairness for real prosperity, redefining natural resource use, redefining progress, redefining matrix, redefining competitiveness, redefining incentives, redefining consumption, redefining finance, redefining governance, and finally redefining leadership. Unfortunately, I have no time to explain that in detail. You would need to read the report itself by yourself. But it's just a kind of a teaser which would try to explain you the logic through which we have tried to solve the problem in which we are facing. Just one example of these system policy level orientations for each of the compass principles. It's an example for first, redefining prosperity. So what we are claiming is that we need to refocus our policy attention and do it in a more balanced way, not only focusing on wealth creation, but also on wealth distribution, to ensure that this economic transition contributes to equity and also social fairness. We also have to create conditions for social acceptance of this necessary transition, because we all know that if this will not be done, transition to a more sustainable economy will simply fail on the basis of social questions. So we need to create conditions that everybody would be able to absorb the full cost introduced through all economic ecosystems, which is also one of the proposals coming later on in this system policy orientations. And finally, we need to replace part of the income-based taxes with resource-based taxes so that we can simultaneously address resource as well as social policy targets. So this is just the example of 3. We have 30 in total, which are clearly showing you the direction in which one would need to go to reach the right redefinition of the prosperity. From there, we are moving more to the real world, to the so-called economic ecosystems, which are designed in relation to the resource-intensive human needs. So we have identified 4, which are from the intensive resource use, most important through the optic of human needs, nutrition, so our food, housing, our built environment, mobility, our intermodal mobility, and then daily functional needs, consumer goods. So I don't know, computer, which you are looking at, clothes you are wearing, and so on. And then we have identified also 8 crucial supportive economic ecosystems, which are the core enablers that we can really deal with those who are resource intensive in the best way. These are nature-based solutions, of course, everything linked to the energy, materials, which of course needs to be addressed in a circular way, and innovation, digitalization. All that, they're interconnected. So it's a different system than is actually used today in our structures of the economy, as well as in our structures in the governments and also in European Commission, but it's guaranteeing you a kind of comprehensive and the view which puts in the first place the logic of interconnectivity of everything what we have to master together. Finally, we have then presented also 50 major industrial investment opportunities in healthy food, in built environment, intermodal mobility, consumer goods, nature-based solutions, energy, circular materials, and information and processing. So if I summarize, we have 10 compass redefinitions, 8 economic ecosystems, more than 50 plus investment opportunities, and compass redefinitions are connected with 30 policy level orientations. Each of the economic ecosystems has also 3 to 5 economic ecosystem policy specific orientations, so something 30 in total again. And then we have a detailed explanation why these investment opportunities make sense and why they are consistent with the compass orientation and also with everything which is connected to the economic ecosystems. Finally, just a few words about the European Green Deal and the COVID-19. One of the lessons which we should all remember is this one. Some are saying that the world after COVID-19 will not be the same. Unfortunately, it will be very much the same. We will hopefully just better understand it. Very likely, the frequency and the severity of health-related outbreaks, climate-related extreme weather events will in the future increase. So this leads us that we need to rethink the way we are managing the risks as individuals, collectively, as private companies, and as public policymakers locally and globally. And the final conclusion is, of course, that we need to collaborate more, build resilient societies together and be better prepared. One lesson is also clear is that role of science in policy making needs to be more put into the center of our decision making. And finally, not many of us maybe know that precautionary principle, it's part of European Union treaties. Trying to better implement it in practice might not be so bad idea. It could save our jobs and of course also our lives. Why are European Green Deal and post-COVID recovery actually two sides of the same coin? First, if you look at it from the competitiveness policy angle, European Union, it's according to raw materials scoreboard, importing 75 to 100% of most metals which we build in high-tech products. And more than half of our energy are met by net imports. Since the prices for raw materials are extremely volatile and we see lately also growing quite quickly, and since resources constitute the largest share of industry input costs, it's quite obvious. This is the most important competitiveness policy for the future European Union. And second, when we are looking at it from the effects of reconsidering globalization, some of the side effects which we have seen also through the COVID, if you go via the circular economy, you are actually building an economy which is more self-sufficient, which is more resilient, and where you are creating more local jobs. So again, it is a very good, already European Green Deal is a very good answer to reconsidering globalization effects some are calling for. Third, we have seen that in the past we were indebting through depletion of natural capital future generations. Now, with a lot of investments which we are rightly doing for post-COVID recovery, we are to a large extent indebting them again financially. So at minimum, we should provide them with a safer, more sustainable and resilient world that it's the current one. Again, European Green Deal, it's already the answer for that. COVID-19 is also providing the necessary missing urgency in time of how to actually join enough funding capacities and also human power for change. And we should use that opportunity. Again, this is pretty much something which was missing in European Green Deal, and now combining with the COVID-19 experience, I think we can deliver this missing urgency. And finally, both European Green Deal and also post-COVID-19 are actually requiring a new approach to governance, in particular more collaboration on the global level. As you know, we have multi-annual financial framework, we have the budget which is as it is, but most important message is that practically through the next generation, through the recovery instrument, we have almost doubled the European budget for the next years, which means that we have the potential of funds, it's almost doubled, and it's unique opportunity, now or never, to really change some of the prepositions and to align our current activities for going for post-COVID recovery with the European Green Deal activities. To conclude, ladies and gentlemen, science is convincing. We have many of the reports, UNEP, IPBS, IPCC, Disgupta, OECD, World Resources Institute, Oxford, UNEP, IRP, World Bank, and so on. The conclusion of all is the world is not on track to achieve the environmental dimension of the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030 or other internationally agreed environmental goals by 2030. So we have clear analysis of where we are going with the scientific analysis, where we are going with the climate change policy, where we are going with the biodiversity policy, where we are going with pollution and health policy. It's simply not enough. And we have to be aware that those things are very much interconnected, and it is essential to address the drivers and pressures leading to them. The way forward proposed by science, it's also pretty clear. Accounting for nature, pricing externalities, restricting quantity, investing in future, raising productivity, managing demand, sustainable consumption and production, nature-based solution, and so on. So, in short, as was nicely summarized by Goethe, unfortunately, knowing it's not enough, we must apply, and willing it's not enough, we must do. Probably the most important question was actually asked recently by Commissioner Thierry Breton, by asking ourselves, do we have the courage to do what really takes? Ladies and gentlemen, there has never been a better moment for Europe to move from the history of resource-driven imperialism into an era of responsible use of natural resources, mitigating its resource fragility, and also strengthening preparedness and resilience. This would also clearly position European Green Deal, give it a real historic and strategic weight in our efforts for something with which we started today's presentation, that is global circular economy. Thank you for your attention.